As non-Arab speaking people, what is the safest way to deal with the Quran?
In terms of?
In terms of looking at interpretations, in terms of selecting the right resources. And we don't have time to skim through everything.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned about the Quranic study Quran book, which is a good idea, I think. Supposedly all the different interpretations and things like that. But because the methodology was wrong, then But as laymen, how do we deal with Quran and avoid losing the meaning?
Yeah. Well, the initial problem is not knowing Arabic. In our madhab, that problem is taken care of because Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu and many of his students say that studying Arabic is fard ayn. It's not fard kifaya, it's fard ayn. It's wajib on every single Muslim male and female to learn Arabic. So then not having access to the Arabic of the Quran is a consequence of neglecting an obligation. We must understand this. So we're in this problem. Why? Because we've neglected. When I say we, I'm not placing the blame. Because it might be the society, it might be the authorities, it might be one's parents and how they're guided. But the idea is, it's not happening. This wajib is not being done. So now, we're in the situation. Now, when we're in the situation, how do we get out? Start learning Arabic. That's the beginner. Start learning Arabic because it's fard, it's wajib. If you have time to do any other thing, then you have time to do your wajibat. Now, in the meanwhile, how do we deal with understanding the Quran? Yeah, this is difficult because I personally don't have an experience of it. It's not to brag, it's just to say, if you've experienced something, you can guide and say, okay, this is something that like you would know about different translations, different resource materials, but I don't because I haven't had that issue. What I advised people to do in the past is, there are websites, I came across a website but I don't remember its name, where they have multiple translations and you can switch between 8 translations for every ayah. And as you view each translation, you see the different approach of it, and sometimes the meanings are either sometimes completely different or sometimes slightly different, but you get a greater sense of what was meant. So I would advise people, of course, if you want to read the entire Quran, like you just want to do that, sit down and read the entire Quran, that becomes difficult if you're looking at. But, so in that case, people would prefer, and it's actually advisable, to get one proper one and read the entire thing so that you don't get too overwhelmed. Which one? Yeah, I won't be able to. I don't know which one. Every translation of the Quran has problems. Every single one. Then translation has to do with interpretation. And interpretation is affected by different beliefs. So a translator may rely on an interpretation, but like a tafsir. But that tafsir may be influenced by a number of beliefs that then impacts how the translation is done. So somebody may rely, for example, on a tafsir that comes from somebody who believes that Allah Azza wa Jal has a physical reality. And so things like hands will be translated as hands, to mean hand. Things like face of God will be face of God. Because as an interpretation, the person doesn't see that as a problem. The translator relied on a tafsir that doesn't see that as a problem. So then that ends up in the translation. Whereas if a translator knows the tafsir or relies on a tafsir that doesn't see the possibility at all of God having physical qualities, then words like face, hands would not show up in his translation, because it wouldn't be permissible for it to show up in the translation. Or if it does come, like he kept the word, there will be a note or something, some tool that indicates this is not to be taken literally. So there are a number of things that can actually affect translation of the Quran, because translation is not only the words. The next lines of the poem talk about translation. So which translation to use, I don't know. I've seen several where each one of them has problems. So yeah, to read one, I don't know. I would advise, because the Quran is something you have to read over and over. Maybe start with one, move to another, and then make note of the differences. But in the meantime, the permanent solution is to learn Arabic. I mean, there's no running away from it. It's wajib, and we have to learn it. It's important to learn it. And yeah, we shouldn't make excuses. There are, no matter what we use it as our excuse, you'll find somebody who has that same situation but managed to do it. I know people who learned Arabic by themselves without any teachers at all. Sat down and self-taught, and he self-learned Arabic so that they can read the Quran. And then when they read Arabic text and explain, it's amazing that they've done that by themselves without any teacher. Just learn Arabic with themselves. There's this woman who was accepted Islam, so convert, and was older, so upper in age, and had no teachers of Arabic. And I know that woman learned Arabic on her own so that she can understand the Quran. So this is, we're talking about, if somebody says, oh, I'm a bit too old for that. No, you're not. Somebody says, no, there are people who are doing it, you have to do it. And of course, rely on Allah Azza wa Jalla. You don't ever rely on yourself. Anybody who makes physical excuses are people who are relying on themselves. I'm too this, or I'm... If you rely on Allah Azza wa Jalla, then ability doesn't come from this world. That's an important thing to understand. Ability of anything, to do anything, is not grounded in the world. It comes from Allah. So once somebody knows that it comes from Allah Azza wa Jal, then ask Allah. Right? There is this one alim who was 40 years old. And 40 is when people are already becoming mujtahids in those times. Like 40 was your seasoned alim. And he didn't learn anything, but he wanted to learn. So he made dua, he said, oh Allah, give me the ability to learn the religion, to implement the religion, and to teach the religion. And then he studied for 40 years, and he taught for 40 years. So, yani, just make up your mind and do it. Then you can rely on there are some books in English where they break down the Quran word by word in terms of, so every single word they go through the linguistic meaning, and then the figurative meaning, and then the possible meanings in this ayah. Also subject to interpretation, so a lot of it will be, but these are tools that people can use until they learn Arabic. Yeah. The other thing is that, things like, because you brought up the study Quran. The study Quran shouldn't be read by people, by non-ulama. People who are not scholars shouldn't read it at all. Because if you can't sort out what is right and what is wrong, and you know the people who are doing it are people with a very specific philosophy, and a specific philosophy that affects matters of religion. So, perennialists, why would you want to read something that they produce? And there are fatwa across the Muslim world that either prohibit the reading of it completely or prohibit the reading of it for non-ulama. Because you just can't subject yourself to that type of. So the academic value is the academic value. But the academic values are for academicians. An academic can benefit from the academic value of something. A carpenter can benefit from the state of the art of carpentry tools. You take a scholar and you give him 2 hammers and they're both the same to him. Right? Because for him, you need to put a nail into the wall. Both of them can do that. You take a carpenter and ask him what is the difference between this hammer and this hammer, he might be able to explain for 2 hours what the difference is, because that's his tool. He knows what the difference is from a practical level. He's the one dealing with that. He can tell you. So why would you take a non-academician and tell him, oh, the academic value of this work is so great, read it? Well, he doesn't have the tools to read it. Why would you do that? Right? It's like any other. You don't give things to people who are not qualified. You don't give sharp objects to children. Why? Because they don't know how to use it. So, when we speak about that particular work, it's not to say, to put it down, it's to say that it has some value, but there are people who can tap into that value. But it shouldn't be made available for people who don't have that tool set to tap into that value. It's the same reason we warn against the for example, Wahhabi tafsirs of the Quran. Why do we tell people don't read it? Not because they didn't bring anything to the table that we can benefit from. Right? The Ibn Taymiyyah, all of the ulama benefit from Ibn Taymiyyah. The ulama of Islam that came after Ibn Taymiyyah, Ahlul Sunnah ulama, benefited from Ibn Taymiyyah because he brought a lot to the table. And nobody would deny his ilm. Nobody would deny the knowledge of Ibn Taymiyyah. Incredible memory. He was a hafiz of Quran. He was a hafiz of hadith. Would they advise the public to go listen or read the works of Ibn Taymiyyah? They didn't. They criticized it. And there are many others like that. Why? Because you need to have you need to have the toolbox to deal with it. So, anyway, I'll stop because if I keep going, I'll keep going.